On Syria, our strikes last Friday were successful in degrading Syria's chemical weapons, research, and storage facilities without a single report of a civilian casualty. This is a testament to the professionalism and precision of the U.S., UK, and French forces that carried out this mission. As we expected, Russia immediately began a misinformation campaign to hide its complicity by sowing doubt and confusion. Following our operations, Russia falsely claimed Syrian air defenses shot down a significant number of missiles when, in fact, we hit all of our targets. Of the surface-to-air missiles that the Assad regime launched, nearly every one was launched after the last of our missiles hit their targets. The Russian-manufactured air defense systems were totally ineffective. Russia and the regime demonstrated the ineffectiveness of their systems again 2 days later when those systems engaged accidentally. We have seen no indication the Assad regime is prepared to launch another chemical weapons attack. However, we remain vigilant. Yesterday, we were disappointed, but not surprised, to see the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons team come under attack by small arms fire after arriving in Duma. Assad must know the world will not tolerate the use of chemical weapons under any circumstances. What happens next is up to Bashar al-Assad. The strike last Friday was separate and distinct from our mission in Syria, which remains the complete annihilation of ISIS. We remain committed to working by, with, and through the Syrian Democratic Forces, who have proven the most reliable partners in the fight against ISIS, to set the conditions for local governance to take root and thrive in liberated territories. Therefore, we must maintain the pressure on the remnants of ISIS and the middle Euphrates River Valley. We must also maintain the 70-nation Defeat ISIS coalition in order to combat the violent terrorist group wherever it rears its ugly head, whether it's the Sahel, Southeast Asia, Afghanistan, Europe, or the United States. We will continue to support the United Nations-backed Geneva peace process and its special envoy, Staffan de Mistura. We support our diplomats who are working tirelessly to bring all parties to the table to negotiate a political resolution to the civil war that has cost far too many innocent Syrians their lives. However, the process will continue to be stymied as long as Moscow thwarts its progress and fails to hold Assad accountable for his regime's atrocities. We call on Russia to fulfill its commitments as the guarantor of the Assad regime's obligation to abandon its chemical weapons and prevent the regime from ever using chemical weapons again. And with respect to the Secretary's advice and counsel, that is discreet and confidential between him and the President. However, what I can tell you is any option that the Secretary provides to the President, he has confidence in. Ultimately, it is up to the President to decide what options we actually execute. So the Secretary has provided options, and ultimately the President decided how we would do this. And to remember, we also had 2 permanent members of the Security Council. This was a combined operation, and therefore, and this was a successful mission. So the Secretary is perfectly comfortable with the options that he provided. Jennifer.
Just to follow up on Lita's question, General, you say that empirically none did escape because there were no casualties, but couldn't that also mean that there were no chemical weapons at those sites? How do you know there were chemical weapons at those sites?
Sure. So based on all source intelligence, we assessed there were some chemical weapons at those sites. None escaped that we can see, but certainly we can't say with 100% certainty that that's the case. But we believe the absolute preponderance of the evidence is that there were chemical weapons at that site, to include elements of sarin, particularly at the Barza site.
Okay. And then, did Russian warships threaten U.S. or British warships at any time? Did you take threats from Russia seriously that they could hit the Donald Cook, and is that why the Donald Cook wasn't used in this strike?
So at no time did the Russians threaten the Donald Cook. As you know, there were two Russian FFGs, frigates in the Eastern Mediterranean. The Donald Cook was our only surface warship in the Eastern Mediterranean. During the strike, we had a significant combat air patrol overhead of the Donald Cook provided by U.S. European Command. So we didn't feel threatened at any point during that strike, and in fact, no threats were conveyed by the Russians. Their activities were actually professional in that they observed the rules of the road at sea, and the Cook was never threatened.
And Dana, why was this not a NATO operation with the 29 members? Was that by design?
It was the fact that NATO SecGen, we've had a lot of support from NATO. You've seen many NATO nations express support for the strikes. France and the UK were natural allies. Not only have we worked together for a long time, but we share common principles. We had to move quickly, and France and the UK were obvious partners.
But it was not because NATO allies didn't want to participate?
No, it had nothing to do with whether or not NATO allies wanted to participate. We wanted to react quickly, and UK and France were obvious natural partners. Tara. Lita.
Two things. One, General, I was wondering if you could give us some more specific BDA from the strikes. Dana mentioned that it did degrade chemical weapons. Were there chemical weapons in some of the storage facilities that you're able to assess? And do you have any further knowledge or convincing that there was sarin used as opposed to just what was said the other day, the suspected use of sarin? And then Dana, can you tell us, did the military and did the Secretary argue for a more limited strike in Syria with the knowledge that perhaps a more expansive strike might require congressional approval?
General Lynch.
So I'll begin by just referring you back to the photographs that we showed on Saturday. Those are pretty compelling when you take a look at the damage that we achieved against the three targets. So we assessed that the weapons hit the target. We achieved the level of success that we wanted against those three targets. We believe that there was probably some chlorine and possibly sarin at possibly all of the sites. As you know, we don't have access to that site, so it's hard to go in and do that post-strike analysis except from a distance and with overhead imagery. So that's probably going to be an open question for a little bit of time, although we continue to look at those sites very closely through a variety of means. But I would tell you, as we really can improve in the assessment that we gave you Saturday, and the image is pretty compelling. Those three targets were knocked out.
So you don't think you will have any greater knowledge or assurance that there was indeed sarin used at this point?
Well, your question was sarin at the three sites that we struck. So we believe that it probably was. Through careful weaponeering, through plume analysis, through the modeling that we do within our targeting enterprise, as we look at those targets, we're able to reduce the possibility of that escaping to a very low level. And we know empirically, in fact, none did escape, just based on the fact there were no casualties around it. So that's sort of where we are. It remains deep. One of the targets is in downtown Damascus, so I doubt we're going to get much access to that in the immediate future, although we continue to look through a variety of means to follow up our assessment.
Absolutely. Jamie.
You mentioned that the Russian air defenses were, the Russian-made air defenses were ineffective. Point of clarification and then a policy question. Were they ineffective because the Russians chose not to engage them against the incoming missiles, their S-400 system, or was it because it didn't work?
Well, so in the attack on Friday night, Russian air defenses were energized. They were scanning. They had a mainstay air defense aircraft up. They did not choose to engage. So I can't speculate about why they did or didn't do that. I can tell you, though, that the rest of Syrian air defense capability, which is completely Russian-made, Russian-designed, Russian-supported, engaged extensively and comprehensively failed. So I think there's a distinction there, and I recognize that. The Russians didn't do anything, although they're very closely allied to all the systems that the Syrians employed to no effect.
So that brings me to the policy question, which is, what progress has been made in trying to convince Turkey not to go ahead with its purchase of Russian air defenses that would be incompatible with NATO and U.S. air defenses, and find some other solution so that we don't have that situation where a NATO ally is buying Russian defenses that perhaps aren't as good as ours?
Well, we have talked to the Turks about the issue of interoperability, but ultimately the Turks have to decide what's in their best strategic interest, and that's for Ankara to determine.
Is the United States still trying to get Turkey to not go forward with that purchase?
We continue to be in conversations about our concerns with respect to the interoperability with NATO.
Thank you. So General McKenzie, to follow up on Jennifer's question, at our briefing on Saturday morning, you'd mentioned that you'd be monitoring the sites for any sort of maybe signatures of chemical weapons being there. Has the U.S. been able to employ any of its sensors to detect if there was any chemicals there? And then secondly, on the platforms that were used, could we go back to the air platforms that were used? We're hearing reports that there were F-22s involved and that the JASMs that were fired were not JASM ERs, but
So
regular
let me work backwards. The JASMs that were fired were standard JASMs. They were not JASM ERs. So I misspoke when I gave that information the first time, and I think AFCENT actually clarified that, and we went out and clarified it after the press conference. Any U.S. fighter aircraft that were employed in this operation were employed as part of an integrated package in the CENTCOM AOR for protection of the bombers. So no fighter aircraft penetrated further than where the B-1s actually launched the JASMs and then turned away. So none actually went forward from that point. They were there simply as part of the integrated package.
so just one quick, and then Dana, I have a question for you too. But can you confirm at this time that Raptors then provided protection for the bombers as part of that strike package?
Sure, I can tell you that U.S. fighter aircraft provided protection for the bombers. We'll get